Here's some leather.
No, things weren't what Bill had hoped for, in more ways than one. Bill's kid brother was still in China. His letters all read the same.
I'm fed up with this mess. We're still training the Chinese. Thought the war was over. This place gives me the creeps. Kids hang around our garbage cans, waiting for us to clean our plates, while their own government big shots take their cut of UNRWA supplies. What a deal. What goes on here?
Bill was wondering, too. He believed in the war as a great struggle against the enemies of the common people, but he was finding out now that not all his enemies were on the Axis side. Strange facts about the war were coming out. In 1942, we wanted to land in France. But Churchill pressed for a campaign in Italy to save Britain's interests in the Mediterranean. Still playing power politics, he pulled troops out of Italy and sent them off to Greece to fight on the king's side against the people.
Diversion of 8th Army units to meet the political crisis in Greece disrupted our plans. The Germans had time to refit and strengthen their forces.
American lives were sacrificed to pay for a Greek government the people didn't want. All this apparently seems quite normal to Congress. Roosevelt's old enemies are again making government policy. They are the friends of big business, the men who believe in atomic diplomacy. The president himself shared the platform at an American university with Winston Churchill when he called for an Anglo-American alliance against Russia. Is this what millions of men died for?
But we of the United Nations are not making all this sacrifice of human effort and human lives to return to the kind of world we had after the last World War.
When Bill walked on the picket line the morning of January 15th, he was fighting for the decent standard of living that Roosevelt had pledged in the Economic Bill of Rights. The right to a job, to food and clothing, to fair prices, to protection against monopolies, the right to a decent home, medical care, a good education, the right to economic security. Bill fought for this new Bill of Rights as part of a mighty CIO struggle against the economic royalists. At the National Labor Management Conference, CIO President Philip Murray had sought tenaciously for recognition of the need for wage increases and of price control. Within a week, 1.5 million CIO workers were on strike. Auto, steel, packers, communications, farm equipment, all fighting for a decent America. Lynn, Massachusetts, Ontario, California, Fairmont, West Virginia, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Jersey City, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Schenectady, Philadelphia, plant after plant, town after town, from coast to coast, the picket lines grew. Big lines and little. The machinery of strike committees functioned like clockwork, and the UE strike was solid 100%. In bitter January weather, there was fire for cold hands and feet, hot coffee and hot food for weary union fighters. The support of the strike was magnificent. There were plenty of attempts at provocation, but the picket lines were solid. The most significant phase of the UE strike was the tremendous community support it received. Dozens of mayors and dozens of city governments and dozens of congressmen supported those on strike. Typical was Lynn, Massachusetts, where the mayor sent a letter to GE.
I have talked personally with many of the workers. I have listened to their arguments, and I must say that their demands seem reasonable and just under all present-day circumstances.
The townspeople agreed with the mayor. Druggist Flaherty offered free medicines. The shoemaker offered shoe repairs. In fact, the whole community pitched in. This was something new for a GE town.
Adequate buying power is necessary to sustain the business life of the community, to enable property owners to pay taxes, to enable a city to conduct its municipal government on the basis of solvency and service.
The interests of the community and the interests of the workers were one. The justice of the union position was obvious. The companies could not conceal the truth. The union waged one of the greatest publicity campaigns in trade union history. It used ads, radio, records, and sound trucks. The UE beat the companies at their own game. The people could not be divided. The union could not be isolated. Its strike machinery stood up, and Jim Matley's national director of organization for once was satisfied.
When the companies failed to isolate us from the communities, they tried to smash us by the use of injunctions. Injunctions is the most reactionary weapon used by employers to break a strike. They have been repudiated by the American people and by Congress through the Norris LaGuardia Act. But employers use the injunctions to mobilize the police power of the state to undermine and break a strike. Even the Army and the Navy has been used for the purpose of breaking strike. An injunction is an illegitimate offspring of an undemocratic government and a reactionary employer in the name of law and order. It leads to violence, as in the case of Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia on March 1st, an ominous concentration of police shadowed the peaceful picketing and parading of UE members. An injunction had been granted against picketing. The company thought it had won a major step towards breaking the strike. UE locals in Philadelphia and Camden organized a protest parade, an orderly parade, headed by their country's flag, in the hands of a veteran of the German campaign. To the tune of the Star-Spangled Banner, while everyone stood at attention. But when the parade started, trouble began. The flag was torn from the hands of the veteran. The veteran was beaten. It was said later, in excuse, that the police lost their heads. They certainly lost them in an organized manner. This is the result of having irresponsible officials in the city halls, the state capitals, and in Washington. When violence failed, the companies gave in. Big business was stopped. The strikes were won and the contracts were safe in the hands of Secretary-Treasurer Julius Emspach.
Yes, big business was stopped. With the CIO in the forefront, labor and the people won the first round. But big business is not giving up. It is starting a new offensive. Prices have zoomed. What we won in the strikes is being stolen back from us through a big business Congress. Where are we going? Well, you know what a company town looks like. With this Congress re-elected, we'll have a company country with company housing, company stores, company unions, company discrimination. We'll have unemployment at home, and ultimately, war abroad. There is only one answer. Vote and vote right. Canvassing, registering, voting. Sustained organized effort of every local in its community. Community political action will hold the gains of the picket lines. Millions of enlightened ballots must be cast. We must elect a progressive Congress. Prosperity and even peace itself depend upon it. But behind each ballot is a person, a woman, a man.
Bill Turner went to town to save the OPA. It was little help. The Tafts and the Byrds, the Hoffmans and the Rankins, big business Republicans and Democrats and their flunkies from the South, they fixed the OPA, like they fixed FEPC, like they fixed full employment, like they fixed minimum wages, like they fixed the Hobbs bill, like they fixed too many things in that year of disgrace, 1946. And Bill could see rising prices ahead. And he could see more strikes. And he was grim.
That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Bill is going to do some fixing of his own. He smells November coming. He even smells the date. November 5th.
For untold centuries, the turbid waters of the Colorado River battered their way through the forbidding canyons of its 1,700-mile course, traversing the arid Southwest. For the most part, little known except to the native Indians and a few parties of intrepid explorers. Draining a vast region of mountain and desert, entering 7 of the largest western states, it poured its waters southward into the Gulf of California, carrying into its delta a tremendous volume of silt, and periodically overflowing the prosperous towns and rich agricultural districts near its mouth with devastating floods. From the time of its discovery, it remained a challenge to engineers who sought to control it, until the enactment in 1928 of the Boulder Canyon Project Act, authorizing the construction of Boulder Dam. In Black Canyon, where the Colorado River forms the boundary between Nevada and Arizona, in the very heart of the great desert of the Southwest, the United States Department of the Interior, through its Bureau of Reclamation, was directed to proceed with the construction of this mightiest of dams. Highways were pushed across the desert. Railroad lines thrust their ribbons of steel through the sagebrush and cactus, and transmission lines for construction power were brought hundreds of miles across the heat-stricken wastelands of the southern Nevada desert. Every section of the country was called upon to contribute to the staggering quantity and wide diversity of materials required. Thousands of tons of steel, millions of barrels of cement, machinery, gasoline and oil by the thousands of gallons, tools, building materials, all these and much more were concentrated at the site of operations in an endless stream. The engineering forces completed their surveys, working under the most hazardous conditions, and every union furnished its quota of laborers and artisans. In what had once been an uninhabited, waterless desert, supporting only a sparse, inhospitable growth of chaparral and cactus, the beautiful little town of Boulder City was built within the short space of 15 months to house the army of 5,000 men to be employed. Here was no construction camp such as was known in the early days of the West. Instead, Boulder City was developed as a model town, furnishing every facility and convenience to its inhabitants. 4 churches, a modern, fully equipped school, and various civic organizations met the cultural requirements of the community, while a theater and several clubs furnished recreation. A thriving business section developed along the principal streets, while pleasant homes surrounded by gardens faced the broad tree-lined residential avenues of this modern, spotless town. The buildings housing the offices of the Bureau of Reclamation and the Civic Administration, which operated directly under the federal government, were set in the midst of pleasant parks, which were welcome havens of rest after the day's labors in a country where the summer temperature often reaches 125 degrees above zero. In the business section of the town, arcades formed a protection against the tropic sun. Lovely flower gardens bloomed in marked contrast with the surrounding desert. Lining street after street, the white cottages of the married workmen recalled to mind the military camps of 1918, while single men were housed in air-cooled dormitories, each accommodating 176 occupants. Under conditions which would have gained the wholehearted approval of any modern housewife, tons of food were prepared and served daily in the sanitary, electrically equipped kitchens. A corps of cooks and waiters was able to feed as many as 1,300 men at one setting of the tables. Menus were varied and the food was of excellent quality. As Boulder City was about 7 miles distant from the dam site, it was necessary to provide transportation for the workmen to and from the job. This was accomplished by a fleet of passenger motor trucks, some of them carrying as many as 160 men. A 24-hour day was divided into 3 shifts of 8 hours each for all classes of labor. The 4th of July, Labor Day, and Christmas were the only holidays observed. Once the rapid tempo of the ambitious construction schedule was established and underway toward the marking of a record-breaking achievement in American engineering history. It was in March 1931 that 6 Companies Incorporated of San Francisco, California, was awarded the general contract for the construction of the project, including Boulder Dam and its appurtenant works. And by early summer of the same year, preliminary construction work was in full swing in Black Canyon. During this early period of construction, before roads had been built into the depths of the gorge, men and materials were forced to take to boats or travel the catwalks, often swung between the sheer walls of the canyon at dizzy heights above the muddy waters of the world's most dangerous river. It was not long before roads and rail lines had penetrated into the very lowest reaches of the canyon, To provide these arteries of transportation, thousands of tons of virgin rock were blasted from the age-old walls of the gorge. Thus, the first thunders of man's determination to conquer the Colorado River reverberated between the sheer cliffs of the canyon, which heretofore had known only the hot silence of the desert and the roar of the river's angry floods. The boring of 4 diversion tunnels to carry the stream around the dam site during construction, 2 on each side of the river, 56 feet in diameter and averaging 4,000 feet in length, constituted the first major construction operation. The drilling jumbos used on this job were mounted on motor trucks to facilitate handling and were capable of driving from 24 to 30 powder holes into the heading simultaneously by means of drifter drills. The tunnels were excavated through the rock simultaneously from 4 headings, 1 at either end and 2 boring in opposite directions from a river-level auxiliary tunnel located about midway on the main bore. A pioneer drift was drilled at top line and closely followed by the excavation for the complete 56-foot bore. Thousands of tons of drilled steel were used in this work, and the sharpening shops were kept working at top speed night and day to maintain a steady supply. After the powder holes had been drilled and the rock blasted, power shovels and trucks moved into the tunnels for the purpose of removing the shattered material. An unbroken parade of heavy-duty trucks, each handling from 8 to 10 tons of rock, labored up over the steep roads cut into the canyon walls to dispose of the material in the gulches adjacent to the dam site. This phase of the task, which entailed the excavation and the handling of over 1.5 million cubic yards of material, was completed within a period of 13 months and was considered the most grueling portion of the work for both men and machinery. After the tunnels had been excavated, they were lined with concrete, 3 feet in thickness. Due to the unprecedented size of the bores, special equipment was designed to facilitate this task. The tunnels were lined in segmental sections, the invert or base being the first in which the concrete was placed. A gantry crane operating through the tunnel itself handled the concrete throughout this operation. The sidewalls were next lined behind movable steel forms, which traveled through the excavated section on rails laid from portal to portal. The top arch was placed with the use of a concrete gun operated by compressed air. To prepare the canyon walls to receive the abutments of the dam and to remove loose and dangerous rock from the face of the cliffs overhanging the site, many tons of rock were torn away and hurled into the depths of the canyon in a series of spectacular blasts, which occurred almost daily during the period from commencement of operations at the dam site to the time when actual building of the dam began about 2 years later. To reach their positions on the canyon walls, the men engaged in the work of drilling and handling explosives for these huge blasts traveled in cages or skiffs swung on cables at heights of hundreds of feet over the river. To the casual observer, this dizzy sky ride must have seemed thrilling indeed, but to the workmen themselves it became a matter of course and all a part of the day's job. The first step in preparing for the blast was the drilling of powder holes into the rock of the canyon wall. For this purpose, the jackhammer drill, operated by a single man, was generally used. The holes were then loaded with dynamite, and the blast set off, shattering the air with its detonation and shaking the very earth with its force. After the blast, these acrobatic workmen, known in construction camp parlance as high scalers, swarmed over the face of the cliff to remove the fragments of rock shattered and loosened by the upheaval of the explosion. Only in this manner could the walls be successfully cleared of debris. Swinging in bosun's chairs from the canyon's rim, these daredevils were protected in their hazardous work by hard helmets, safety ropes, and other safety appliances. November 1932, preparations were made to divert the river through the tunnels. A small blast opened a breach in a temporary dike which had held the river in check at the entrance to one of the tubes, opening the way for the free passage of the water into the 50-foot concrete-lined bore. A temporary dam of earth and rock was quickly thrown across the stream, deflecting the entire flow. Within 24 hours, the Colorado River, under control for the first time in its history, was flowing around and past the dam site through the huge diversion tubes. An all-time record was set in placing the more than 1 million cubic yards of material required for the construction of the two cofferdams, in themselves barriers of no mean proportions. The earth fills were compacted to an elevation well above the high water mark to prevent the flow of the river from entering the scene of operations during the construction of the dam and power plant. After the completion of the cofferdams, the site was unwatered, and a fleet of power shovels and trucks put to work on the excavation of the riverbed material to provide foundations for the structures. This excavation was carried to a point 135 feet below the old river level, necessitating the handling of more than 2 million yards of rock, earth, and sand. Here again, the stamina of both men and machinery was put to a severe test in transporting the waste from the very lowest depths of the gorge. As the cleanup of the dam site progressed, the ancient bed of the Colorado River was laid bare. Here, geologists were able to read the story of what had happened ages ago, when the chasm now called Blacken had been carved out of the primal rock by the rush of water from a great inland sea, and the Colorado River was settling into its present bed. To ensure the greatest possible stability for the foundation of the dam, meticulous care was exercised in preparing the rock surfaces for the reception of the first concrete. Sand and gravel for the 4.5 million cubic yards of concrete required for the construction of the dam and its appurtenant works were obtained from a detrital deposit located on the Arizona side of the river, some 12 miles upstream from the dam site. Here, the raw material was excavated by dragline and hauled by train to the gravel screening and washing plant, which was the largest of its kind ever built, being capable of producing 20,000 tons of crushed, screened, graded, and washed materials every 24 hours. Arriving at the plant, the raw material was dumped into hoppers, from which it was conveyed into the plant over endless belts. Here it passed through the various stages of screening, by which it became suitable aggregate material for the manufacture of concrete of a quality meeting the most rigidly uniform requirements. Oversized cobbles, that is, those measuring more than 9 inches in one dimension, were first screened out, then crushed and returned to the plant for regrading, along with raw material. The screening plant itself consisted of 4 towers of similar design, each equipped with screening apparatus, and each separating out gravel of a different given size from the mass of raw material reaching the unit over the conveyor belts. An endless stream of raw, pit-run gravel passed over the screens, and the selected material carried to the stockpiles over the conveyor belts, each of the 4 sizes being stocked separately, ready at hand when needed at the mixing plants. A clarifier tank provided 6 million gallons of clear water daily for washing gravel and sand. Raw material for concrete manufacture, which fell into the size classified as sand, was graded a second time into 3 sizes after the very fine and undesirable sand had been discarded. The 3 selected sands were then recombined into a uniform mixture to meet specifications for the concrete to be used in the dam and the appurtenant structures of the project. The sand was then stored awaiting the requirements of the construction program. As the graded materials were called for, conveyor belts loaded the sand and gravel into railroad cars for transportation to the concrete mixing plants located at the dam site several miles distant. Concrete was mixed in 2 plants, one located in the bottom of the canyon upstream from the dam, and the other on the canyon rim on the Nevada side, immediately over the dam site, both equipped with the most advanced machinery for concrete manufacture. Upon arrival at the concrete mixing plant, sand and gravel of the various sizes were stored in separate bins. A railroad system of sizable proportions was required to maintain a steady flow of material from the gravel pit to the screening plant and from the screening plant to the concrete mixing plants. Bulk cement was unloaded from railroad cars by means of a pneumatic pump and conveyed into the bins of the blending plant, where cements from several production sources and of varying physical and chemical characteristics were combined into a uniform product. This was necessary because of the requirement for standardization in concrete workability, strength, texture, color, and other properties. Following the progress of concrete manufacture through its successive stages, we see the several ingredients entering the concrete mixing plant, where they were combined scientifically and under rigid inspection into a finished product. With a maximum capacity of 20